This podcast is brought to you by the Prospect Research Institute, where researchers come to learn, innovate, and connect.
I think that wealth amplifies character, it amplifies your personality. So if you're stingy, you're going to be a stingy millionaire or billionaire. So you learn the joy of giving.
Welcome to Prospect Research Chat Bites, a podcast by and for prospect research professionals. I'm Jennifer Filla. Today, I'm talking with Jeff Jowdy, President at Lighthouse Council. Hello, Jeff. Thank you for joining me today on Chat Bites.
Jen, it's great to be with you. Thanks for including me.
So I can't wait to ask you questions about your experience with major gifts. But before that, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you came into fundraising and what you're doing now.
Oh, sure. Like many, it was not a planned course. I had wonderful parents who were involved in communities in which we lived. My dad was involved in his profession. So you kind of grow up expecting to give and be involved and to serve, for which I'm grateful. In college, I was president of a debate society, and we had a historic building that needed renovation. So in college, I had my first capital campaign experience, and kind of my father gave me advice. He said, you need to go meet the VP for advancement, who became a mentor, and I'd follow him around campus. And for whatever reason, never thought about that as a career, but certainly learned a lot way back when about fundraising and advancement work. And then I was working in healthcare, and my boss had been asked to chair a regional chapter of the March of Dimes. And unbeknownst to him, I had actually been a youth volunteer with the March of Dimes in college. So it was something I was already passionate about, but he didn't bother to ask. He just told me, Jeff, you're going to. And so I became chair. And then a couple of years after, became a staff member when the March of Dimes was consolidating 5 chapters, and they looked for someone to lead them. So that became my entree into professional fundraising, and then loving the work and loving volunteers, but really wanting to get more into your line, major gifts. And I went to work in an independent school where we hired, at the time, iconic firm, Gerald Panis, Lindsay and Partners, and my consultant, Brent Kennedy, who, like Jerry, became a lifelong friend and mentor. After we finished a very successful campaign, he said, Jeff, we need to get you out of here. We're gonna hire you. And actually, that's a model that I've used. But many of our team are former clients. So anyway, so that's became the path, and went to work for a large national firm, and loved the work and loved working with Jerry Panis and some incredible folks, but knew that I wanted to do that kind of work, but frankly wanted a bit more quality control and a little bit less travel. And so we founded Lighthouse Council in 1999 and have just been a great experience ever since.
I'm stunned. Like, you did your first capital campaign in college. Wow. Talk about training. I mean, that's before there was a degree in philanthropy like there is now.
No, exactly. It was, and it was like that. We had an advisor, and you're in college or in groups, and you're used to fundraising and are used to reaching out to alumni. And every year would do a direct mail to alumni for this organization, and the response was always pitiful. But there was it made it worth the effort. But beyond that, there was no real return. We had a new advisor, who was from a very prominent Georgia family. His roots went back to the founding of the state, and his immediate family were founders of one of the largest law firms in Atlanta. Another brother was longtime editor of the Atlanta newspaper. So he was tied into Georgia connections and Georgia society, and people that we would write letters to and get nothing, he would write a letter or pick up the phone, and we got huge gifts. And so back to doing research, right? Knowing who asked whom and what the right approach is. And he knew it. And that was a eye opener for me in early learning. Yeah.
Yeah. Relationships too, right? So you got to do your research, have the relationships, and then you mentioned quality control. So that's a great way for me to jump in and ask you about your experience with research, because it's one thing that we struggle with. Like, how do you teach this stuff and control for quality? Because it's not a math problem.
No. Well, research, especially major gifts, obviously, it's essential, period. The work that you do and your wonderful book and the training you do and the work you do for clients is invaluable. And I know you've trained many scores, probably hundreds of research professionals. I talk about, having as you use the word, sophisticated or established development or advancement function. And if in that function you have not planned for, budgeted for internal or external prospect research, and you failed, you're not advanced, or you're not sophisticated, you're not established. And too many people either don't invest in it, don't do it at all, or do it shoot from the hip, and it's disjointed. So it's essential. I mean, we're talking about relationship-based fundraising where you have to focus to be successful on your very best prospects in the most personal way, and all that just screams prospect research.
Yeah, and I find sometimes there are major gift officers who haven't had access to research, and they do a really good job of finding information, especially high profile people, but the hours they spend, and really they could be spending that building that relationship instead of researching, trying to find those nuggets.
Yeah, it's the highest and best use. And again, it's a leadership priorities, capacity, and it'd be the same thing if that major gift officer, or I've seen the VP, or CEO, if they're spending time and you see it and you cringe, well, I'm going to enter these in the database, or no one can run reports like me, or no one can do X like me. Yeah, that's not their job, and they're not doing themselves or their organization and the mission justice if they're thinking they're going to get by. And to your point, the other time, that was a time that they could have been visiting with that magical prospect. Yeah, right.
So when you have used research, and as part of getting ready for your prospect meeting or making a connection, or like, what's that like? How do you use the research to prepare?
I think, one thing is that the research is ever evolving and ever changing. And so when I think about how a lot of folks seem to talk about prospect research, it's like we've done it once on the person or the family or the organization, and it's done. And that's my impression. I love your insight, but that seems to be a common. We've done it once and we know it, but it's dated and static. So you really, with every visit, you need that refresher. And then back to your comment about how the, say, major gift officer is spending her or his time, they need a refresher. I mean, I do. If I'm dealing with, I got 30, 40, 50, 70 prospects in my portfolio, how can I remember all of the nuances and all the details before I walk into a visit? It doesn't work. It's not going to happen. You're going to start missing things. And so I think the importance of having that, not only the research, but having a conversation on it, I think is important. I think to be able to have a dialogue would say with the prospect researcher, to say, it's nice to get a report, but it's nice to have a conversation and a dialogue, because people may not pick up on the right things. And I think that's very important. Or even to say, just that conversation and the briefing is important. And then as you go along. So you may have had a briefing or had a conversation 3 months ago or a month ago, but you need to have it again, because if they're doing their job, they're reaching out to a number of people every day. And even those names and those profiles, they'll start to blur. I'm sorry, no matter how bright you are and how great your memory is.
I like to think that that's one of the best data security policies we have here, is that I don't remember any of those names, really, not often, because
Right.
there's so many names and so many industries. And
Right.
just can't keep up. It's funny you mentioned the dialogue. We, as researchers, we often deliver work and never hear again, but it takes two to tango. So we do have to follow up too. I encourage clients to ask us for follow-up questions. And, some of them really do. Those have been some of the best learning conversations I've had as a researcher, when the gift officer calls me up and says, hey, you said this, but did you really mean that? Like, what about this? Or I'm noticing this. And we have this great discussion about wealth and how they might want to give. And they often know so much more than I do about the person.
Yeah.
So it's a fun conversation.
Well, and you can then may supplement that profile or whatever, and I find when you have a conversation, you again, like you said, but everybody learns and you get a better result. It's synergy. And for the major gift officer, whomever, you're going to remember it better if you've had a conversation about it and read it. And so it's just it's a great win-win. Yeah.
That's true. And speaking of all the ways people accumulate wealth, you've been doing this for many years in campaigns. So you're seeing a lot of high net worth individuals, every industry possible, every inheritance possible. They're succeeding in the family business or they start 50 of their own. I'm curious, have you noticed any trends or do you pay attention to how someone came into their wealth as affecting how they view philanthropy?
I'd say yes and no. That's not a great answer to begin. But what we find is that in the old days, and without prospect research, you would think, well, they have to be in their X years before they had wealth to make a major gift. Insert here, 40, 50, 60. They've got to have grandkids. They've got to feel they don't have to, whatever. And so that was an older model. And now with technology and all these entrepreneurs, and with a lot more dynamic wealth building, and you've got multi-millionaires and billionaires at young ages that you never would have fathomed. And it's true, so that'd be the one thing would be that you have a lot of people with a lot of wealth, incredible wealth, overall a lot younger than you would have before. So with that entrepreneurial mind, usually comes more of an entrepreneurial spirit in philanthropy, and some like to be more involved and more hands-on or what have you. So that's certainly a factor. The other is, I think that wealth amplifies character, it amplifies your personality. So if you're stingy, you're going to be a stingy millionaire or billionaire. So you learn the joy of giving. And so that's a big piece is, even across those categories, the reality is that Americans of lower income as a percentage of their income are much more generous than the wealthier. If you sit down and look at the philanthropy of a billionaire in most cases and do that as a percentage of net worth and compare it to yourself, you would know, well, gosh, I'm a lot more generous than fill in the name. So it's the earlier accumulation of wealth, creation of wealth versus inherited. And then, whether you're inherited or your own, or you got it more suddenly to technology or a company that sold, or maybe slower through a traditional path, but still significant attorney, whatever it goes back in most cases to, are they generous and are they giving and do they have propensity to? I don't know if that answers your question, but
it sure does. I loved how you mentioned that wealth often amplifies the existing personality. So when you have someone who was raised in a household that's philanthropic, it really does come through. And I hadn't thought about that perspective before, looking for those origin stories, which we often find on these folks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, back to my experience, I'm involved and I give because my parents did that. And I was taught through home and church and activities that was what I should do and a noble thing. And it's a whole nother issue and question, but philanthropy is stuck in America, at least at about 2.1% of our GDP for decades. And we have yet, as a fundraising profession or through our faith institutions or whatever, to have a really incredible effort to teach people the joy of giving and how important it is, which is a shame. Anyway,
if you could design the perfect prospect research professional, what would that person look like? Like, what might be 1 or 2 or 3 traits that really shine through from your experience?
I think obviously inquisitive, that curiosity that, and some people are and some aren't. And that's a huge piece of intelligence, obviously. Perseverant, I'd say respectful because of the information, how you use it and what you learn. And then I would probably close with something that reflects our conversation, and I'd say collaborative, because they're an important part of the team. And that's the concern, is that sometimes people think that someone, because of the role they may play, and they're in that office, they're going to send me this, and back to the value of that conversation and the dialogue and learning from each other. And so I would definitely say collaborative.
Great. Well, before I let you go, is there a book or a resource that you feel every person in the fundraising field should study?
Well, how about two authors and their different approaches in different generations? One is my former boss and mentor, Jerry Panis. And a lot of folks, fortunately, don't know who Jerry is anymore. He passed away a few years back. But if you Google and look online, he was a prolific author and a lot on major gifts, a lot on boards. And I've never met anyone who better mastered the English language in writing or in speaking. He was inspirational. So I think anything by Jerry Panis will get you up and inspired and focused. And I would encourage that. And the second is my good friend from the UK, Bernard Ross. And he is a rock star presenter. I remember being at an AFP conference. It was, I bet, 20 years ago. A colleague came to me at breakfast and said, I just heard this guy, you've got to come hear him. And when we went to hear him, and he's phenomenal. He's written 4 or 5 books. Of late, they've been on behavioral science and fundraising. And so, but all of his publications, many of which are co-authored. His first was with Claire Siegel, his spouse, but they're all incredible. And the latest is Change for Better with 3 other co-authors, all proceeds going to Doctors Without Borders, but behavioral science lessons from the world's top practitioners and just very actionable, science, factually based information for fundraisers. He has another on how to ask. So I'd say Jerry Panis and Bernard Ross.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for sharing today.
Yeah, it's been a delight, Jen. Thank you so much for including me.
That was Jeff Jowdy, president at Lighthouse Council. How inspiring is it that Jeff seeks to educate donors on the joy of giving? Who wouldn't want that job? That sounds like helping children to choose the perfect ice cream cone. And he didn't mention it, but Jeff has his own fantastic podcast, the Beacon Podcast. Tune in to hear everything you want to know about fundraising, relationships, and helping people learn about the joy of giving. You can find the Beacon Podcast at www.lighthousecouncil.com/podcast. Hey, if you enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come check out the Prospect Research Institute's learning community. It's a membership community with powerful resources, great discussions, and comprehensive courses. Check it out at member.prospectresearchinstitute.org. I'd love to have you join me as a member of the learning community. See you there.